Yes, there's a lot that we've heard from Holacracy. Some examples of the work, a lot of sapos in the States, how they shift from one day to another in this methodology, of working, this new way of working. And your proposal is more not change from one way to another, but doing by models, depending on the circumstances and the context that every organization has.
Sure, and start small. Start with a small experiment. We can afford to fail. It's like the Agile way, and learn from the experience, and then roll it out further according to your learning. And I like to say, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So, it doesn't make any sense to kind of go for a reorg or pull in an entirely different way of doing things. A lot of what you're doing is actually good enough as it is. So, and the other element is we're very strong on the idea of invitation. I don't know about you, but if someone tells me to do something, I have immediate resistance. I mean, that's kind of the guy I am anyway. But if someone makes an invitation and I'm free to reflect on that and make a decision for myself, then I'm much more likely to consider it, at least. And so from my point of view, when any organization is looking to facilitate a change, it's really important to come from a point of invitation, to invite others to the experiment, and to find a group of people who are passionate and engaged to experiment, and let them do it first, and tell their story and share their experiences and their learning. And if it's effective, if it adds value, then of course other people are going to be motivated by that and become interested in their own time. And I really don't see that you can force change on anyone or through any organization. It's got its own pace and its own evolution. And by removing the impediments to people's sense of freedom and autonomy to decide, you thereby, in the long run, I think, create a much more, much greater potential for the kind of transformation that you might know is possible and wish to facilitate.
In which organizations in the world is happening today that they are applying and having results using S3?
Okay, well, firstly, I would reframe your question slightly differently. So it's which organizations are experimenting with patterns from S3? I would strongly discourage anybody from saying, oh, we're doing S3, because I don't think that's an accurate description. It's like we might be adopting the principles of S3 and using those to influence how we behave, and pulling in patterns from the framework to experiment with and learn from, and maybe adapt into a very different form than the kind of core pattern that S3 might be. So in terms of organizations that are using that, or that are experimenting in some way, I think I can mention organizations like CRISP. They're a consulting company in Sweden that we've been collaborating with for some time. There's individuals and within teams in organizations like Spotify and King. There's Champalimau Neuroscience Program. They're a faculty of 200 in Lisbon, in Portugal, are experimenting with S3 patterns, first in the faculty with the principal investigators, and now looking more broadly throughout the whole organization. We have a European funded project, SEOC, Sociocracy, Empowering Organizational Capacity. This is a collaboration between the Italian and Spanish Eco-Village networks, Romanian Transition Network, and the University of Timișoara in Romania. They had a successful application to Erasmus+, and this is a 2-year program to develop internal capacity, including train-the-trainer program. There are numerous smaller organizations and consultants in Belgium, we know now, in Chile, in Brazil. We have courses coming up in Poland also with a consultancy, and one in Gothenburg later this month. So a lot of consultants and coaches who are learning the basics and then taking it to their customers too. And I'm sure I'm missing many organizations. And to be honest, right now, we don't really know who is experimenting with it. I can tell you that we've trained approximately 500 people. I mean, like between a 3 and 4 day introductory course up to 7 or 8 days of course contact, 500 or so people the last year, including places like Israel and South America, and extensively through Europe, the US. And what those people are up to with that, half the time I've no idea, because it seems many people tell me stories, but when I say please write a paragraph and share it with everyone else, everybody's super busy. So, but that gives you an idea of the scope, and I think we can see, for us in 1 year, there's been an extraordinary take-up of experimentation.
I would like to open the space to others to ask. I have received some questions in the chat. Want to invite you.
Yes, I have a question. How is related S3 with lean and Agile has methodology?
Okay, thanks, Marielle. Well, Bernard Brockelbrink, I should mention, he's
yes.
We could call the co-founder of Sociocracy 3.0. And my background is psychotherapy and specializing in work with young people, and particularly around at-risk young people here in the UK particularly, but over a decade or so. And Bernard's background is as an Agile coach. He's worked as technical operator leading tech departments in companies and also coaching independently. And so when we got together to have a conversation about classic sociocracy, he was very curious about how it segued in with Agile and lean thinking. And from there, when we began to develop the S3 framework, we looked at how Agile principles could be woven in through the S3 framework. So if you go into like a description of the patterns, you'll see that we've got backlogs, prioritized backlogs, visualizing work, the notion of pulling in work as a way to coordinate workflow, this idea of iterative development, small experiments, learn and evolve. So I think we could say that S3 is influenced as heavily by Agile and Lean as it is by classic sociocracy, and anyone familiar with those approaches are going to see the similarity. And the other thing was that we decided at the start, how can we pitch this in a way where it has maximum potential to be taken up or to be noticed and taken up by people? Because personally, I'm deeply passionate about some of these patterns and the principles particularly, because I think we desperately need some kind of reform in terms of how we collaborate as human beings together. And to be honest, who's heard of sociocracy? I mean, the last 24 months, maybe more than before. But generally speaking, it's a term that was unfamiliar to people. And when Bernard and I had the conversation, we decided to pitch, first of all, to the tech industry, because tech, within tech, the way people are working is what I would consider probably one of the most progressive ways of collaborating together. They're very flat, small teams, often like multiple roles or without roles, just pulling in work from a backlog and so on. And we decided that by calling it 3.0, it would indicate something different, appeal to people who are familiar with tech, but also that by pitching it to them, it would probably be the audience most competent and able to take up S3 quickly, because most of the principles are already being applied within the Agile community.
Okay, thank you.
James, perhaps related to that, and I apologize if I missed this earlier, this is Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, I'm still slightly confused about the relationship between sociocracy, holacracy, Agile and Lean, which you've just spoken about, and what's the other one? Oh, the work that Frederick Laloux is doing in Reinventing Organisations.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see those all either working together or being complementary or being different?
Okay. Firstly, and this is my observation, so I haven't worked in the Agile community other than as a trainer and consulting through S3, but if I look to the Agile community, I think where applied in practice, where teams are strong is at the operational level. So Agile has really supported teams to flatten, to focus very much on prioritize backlog, to drop the notion of knowing what the end result is going to look like, and instead respond according to feedback on a regular basis. And the capacity of people to collaborate in the daily work is really strong, I think. Classic sociocracy says nothing about organizing work. It's like a methodology for governance, for making decisions together that determine how you're going to do the work. So an organization that's practicing sociocracy might agree to adopt Agile practices into their organization, an Agile approach into their organization, and that would then influence how the work was done. But it's an empty method. It's an empty framework. It helps people to make decisions more effectively. It enables larger organizations to tap the collective intelligence of its members, and also creates a degree of autonomy within teams where people are free to get on with things within the constraints set by that particular team or circle. So sociocracy, classic sociocracy, focuses on governance. In Agile, there's a strong emphasis on operations and delivery of value to the customer. Of course, we've got the customer-centric approach with Lean, and S3 is very much interested in delivering value to the end user, wherever that might be. Holacracy, I've not yet had a conversation with Brian, but my fantasy is that he was envisioning a framework that extended beyond governance and could be a kind of one-stop shop for an organization. As Brian says, an operating system, a term I'm not very comfortable with myself, but an operating system that an organization that can upload to support them with governance and operations. And so this is where I see Holacracy come in. Many people are unfamiliar with the fact, I think, that Brian, he took the basic decision-making patterns from sociocracy, and as far as I see, this is in my opinion, reformulated a lot of the terminology and actually submitted a patent application to secure that approach with his own terms. This was very early on in the days of Holacracy. That was turned down. I'm not sure the reasons. I believe it was because you can't patent the process. But this, for me, is significant in terms of understanding the relationship between Holacracy and sociocracy, because in the early iterations, at least, it was very much influenced by sociocracy. And sociocracy 3.0, it kind of takes bits and pieces from all of them. You know, so we took the notion of navigating via tension that Brian Robertson speaks about. We also introduced this clarity around what we call the driver. When we say driver, we mean the source of our motivation to act. So S3 very much focuses towards what's happening and what's needed. You know, and we focus our attention always and our efforts towards whatever is happening and whatever we agree is needed together. And then obviously there's so many great practices in Agile and so many great principles that we decided to pull those in as well. And classic sociocracy has so much to offer, particularly the principle of consent, this notion of only doing things in the absence of reason not to, and equivalence, like ensuring people affected by decisions are the ones able to influence and make those decisions and evolve those decisions together. So I would say S3 kind of synthesizes different elements, and perhaps most of all probably where it's more like the Agile kind of movement than sociocracy or Holacracy is also we're saying, hey, the principles are the most important thing. There's a variety of different patterns that you can pull in and experiment with, but at the end of the day, it's like about you finding what works best for you, not about us prescribing to you whatever it is that would most serve you. Does that help with your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And could I extend it very slightly in terms of people are also talking about Teal, and there's also this thing about reinventing organizations with Frederick Laloux. What's the link there?
Okay, well, Frederick's book, I think, has made a great contribution, first of all. It's caused one big stir and has brought this conversation, I think, into the public dialogue far more than it ever was before. So I'm really excited about that. I was familiar with integral theory. I have some concerns about the Integral Institute and over the years and various kind of ideas that it amalgamates, but in essence, this notion of kind of evolutionary development, I would see it more as this kind of spherical expansion and contraction, depending on how relaxed we are and how much opportunity we have to learn, rather than any kind of linear evolution. But still, this notion of different kind of behaviors, perspectives, and limitations being present in different organizational systems, we can definitely recognize that. Is it a simplification? I believe it is. I think life is much more complicated than this. But this idea of Teal, there's a lot of people jumping onto the bandwagon with it and saying, hey, look, in essence, is it possible that we can expand our awareness, expand our embrace of diversity, of opportunity, and basically move to a more kind of multi-dimensional perspective where we're more dynamic, fluid, with space for human beings, space for one another. It's got a number of problems, I think. One of those is that everybody at some point, on some level, wants to feel like they are more or less important in different contexts or more or less developed. And I think there's a lot of time wasted around arguing which organizations are Teal or which frameworks are more evolved or less evolved. You know, is S3 Teal, is Holacracy Teal, and so on. Personally, I don't think it's got anything to do with the framework. There's probably an operating bottom line with many of these frameworks, you know, so if I'm not interested in other people, if I'm quite egocentric, self-centric, I'm just focused on profit and telling people what to do, then I'm not going to be interested in frameworks like S3, you know, so you could argue, well, hey, James is not Teal, yeah? But at the same time, it's like on Wednesdays and Thursdays, I've got the consciousness of a slug, you know, or if I'm vulnerable, I really become more egocentric, I'm more defensive, I want to take control more, and so on. And I think this is the same at the organizational level, systemic level, is that it is at the individual level as well. And so we need to be very careful with these terms. I don't believe you can categorize an organization by a color, but certainly as a group of people, we might look at characteristics associated with what people are calling Teal and say, well, how about we together agree to steer in that direction, to see if we can consider one another, to see if we can focus more towards purpose, to be more cyclical, less linear, to kind of embrace chaos more, to be more creative, and so on. You know, these are all practices that we can bring into how we collaborate with one another, and perhaps then lead towards systems that some might analyze and term Teal or orange or whatever, green or whatever.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the questions, Paul.
Can I ask a question?
Hey.
Smart Doug here. I was just wondering, you talk a lot about pattern language. I first met the pattern language through the work of Crystal Alexander in architecture. I know that it's had some currency in software engineering as well. Just wondering what your take on it is and what it brings to the picture.
Yeah, okay, well, firstly I would reference to Bernard if he were here, because this is definitely the area of expertise for him. And he's read a lot of Christopher Alexander. I haven't very much. I've dipped into it. I was introduced to the notion of patterns. I mean, I was familiar, but through Bernard, because Bernard suggested, hey, we could call this the pattern language, and we are currently working on the S3 Patterns Handbook, which is like a basic description of the various patterns that we are currently including in the framework, and considering Christopher Alexander's approach towards framing those and qualifying them. So I can't really speak with any authority or much depth around that, other than to say that I'm aware of Christopher Alexander's work, and we are definitely by that. What I can say is that my understanding of patterns, like a framework of patterns, is that the patterns we're talking about are either a definition, like an organization is a definition, or circle is a definition, or agreement is a definition, or processes like consent decision-making process, for example, driver mapping. These are kind of step-by-step processes that people can follow from start to end and achieve some kind of desired outcome. And also patterns that guide behavior. So for example, we have a pattern called artful participation in S3. And the artful participation is basically the invitation to contribute artfully towards the effectiveness of the collaboration. So definitions, processes, and guidelines for behavior, we see these three different elements all as being defined as patterns that are already being used. We can find them out in the world, and they're replicable in certain contexts.
Yep, that sounds good. The other thing I remember from the pattern language book in particular was how themes appeared at different scales. So a similar piece of thinking about maybe not having something that's too focused on the center, but something a bit off center, so you can create more social spaces. As an example, that operates at different scales in cities and in a home and in between. I was just wondering if something similar you've noticed in what you've been doing.
Yeah, that's a nice addition, and I would say for sure many of the patterns in the S3 framework fit very much in this context. I mean, S3 for one, yeah, Bernard's written some papers on this. S3 for families, S3 within organization, and S3 patterns, in intimate relation, and S3 patterns also at the wider scale, you know, in terms of like social governance and so on. So, yeah, I would very much agree with that.
Okay, thank you. That's great.
I'm seeing a question in the chat here from Adam Pearson. Adam, are you there?
Yeah, I come from a more straight Gravesian background, so I really enjoyed your dissection of some of the Teal background noise. And yeah, in terms of my interest and the reason I'm on the call is looking at what might be a universal language of human development, and such that people from different worldviews, different life conditions, different psychologies can interact constructively towards superordinate goals. And so I'm looking at how might one use S3 or some of the patterns to facilitate a group of people who might otherwise be in conflict.
Yeah, I see. Well, okay, so thanks for the question. I think, first of all, key to any group of people coming together and even considering the notion of collaboration is to be clear on why that's happening to start with. So we very much invite with S3 to get clear on the driver, we say the driver for a collaboration, the driver for the group of people coming together to make proposals together, to agree things together. So, like, what is it that's happening and what is it that's needed that we are motivated to respond to and therefore motivated to collaborate around? So I think this pattern, like drivers in S3, is a really valuable one because it invites people to bring more consciousness to their motivation to come together to start with. Sometimes it's helpful to realize that we came together for different reasons, And actually, we're not really aligned on why we're here, and so we, at this point, let's draw a line and we part our ways. So first of all, let's be clear on why we're coming together to collaborate to start with. Secondly, like, how can we, as much as possible, shift autonomy to individuals and smaller groups to decide? So I think classic sociocracy has done a great thing around this. It's like, let's create small groups of semi-autonomous people with accountability clear, why they're there, what it is that they're doing, and let them decide. In classic sociocracy and in S3, we have this principle of consent, which is basically an equivalence. So let's ensure people affected by decisions have a voice in those decisions, or better still, influence and make those decisions. And also, in the face of reasons not to do something, if it can be argued that doing what's proposed or what's already been done causes harm in some way, or misses an opportunity to improve what we're doing right now, then let's stop and take notice of that. So what does that necessitate? Well, I said about different frameworks, maybe having an operating baseline, and I think the baseline for sociocracy is the willingness to be reasonable. The willingness to consider different perspectives and the arguments that different people have. And when somebody raises objection or stands for something happening, then the first thing, besides agreeing why we're having the conversation, is can we agree on the argument for something or the argument against something? And this is no easy thing, especially when we begin to scale it, and especially when we start to move into environments where there's less trust, perhaps, because it's much easier to come to agreement in a field of trust than one where people don't know one another, or there's vulnerabilities, or there's different worldviews and different perspectives. And I think that fundamentalism, the notion I'm right and you're wrong, period, if that position somehow is a strategy that I've adopted to kind of mask a deeper vulnerability, and you're coming from a different place, and I'm seeing you as a threat somehow to my well-being and my safety, or that of my children, my community, or whatever, then I'm not in that moment at a point where I'm able to reason. I don't think sociocracy, holacracy, Teal, spiral dynamics, or anything else can in and of itself facilitate the evolution of people's consciousness to a point where they can hold their perspective alongside somebody else's and balance them with some kind of reflection and consideration of the circumstances. This necessitates the willingness of people to engage in that kind of process, and enough trust amongst people to be able to do so. And what I would say around S3 is that if a group of people choose to start adopting some of these principles, what does it mean if I consider your point of view? What does it mean if I consider whether what I'm saying, standing for or against, has some kind of basis, some kind of argument? And what does it mean when all of us are free to bring our voice and committed to hear one another's points of view? This naturally starts to lead to greater trust in the field, and we all know if we trust one another more, we relax more. When we relax more, we shine more, we step more into our potential, and when we step more into our potential, part of our potential as multi-dimensional beings is to begin to recognize the complexity, multiplicity, and diversity of all life, including one another, and therefore become more able to listen to one another. So I think that some of the patterns in S3 framework, and certainly the principles, support this very much. I definitely see amongst human beings on a wide scale a wish to be more open, to hear one another more. Personally, I'm very excited about that, but I don't think that's about S3 or any other framework or methodology being a savior. I simply think that some of these frameworks are emerging as we relax more and as we discover more potentials around how we can start to bridge the gaps, transcend more the dualistic, binary, right, wrong, black and white kind of paradigm, and embrace a more both and kind of triune perspective on life.
Great.
I'm curious, Adam, how that lands with you.
Very well. Yeah, I was thinking about self-reflection, and you spoke to that. To what extent do some of the patterns encourage self-reflection, self-honesty, awareness of one's own attachment to one's thinking, ego identification, and how much the processes automatically facilitate that kind of consideration of one's own worldview and projection into what is happening in the group,
Yeah,
or around the problem. Yeah.
yeah. Well, maybe you could follow up on this, Diego, having done the course and you've been experimenting with S3 patterns. But I know for me, I would say that one, absolutely. I think that's probably the biggest challenge, you know. The realization is down to me, you know. If I want to see change, I need to be the change I want to see. If I want people to listen, I need to listen. If I want people to consider my points of view, I need to consider theirs, and so on. So the conscious decision to experiment with some of these patterns definitely invites this, and at the same time it also kind of frees other people up to give the feedback, you know. So if I'm in denial, or I have a blind spot, then there's kind of the rules say, okay, Diego is going to challenge me today and say, well, James, you know, I hear what you're saying, but can you explain why this is kind of harming flow of value, or, you know, how this might help us improve, or why it's even relevant right now? It's kind of inviting me to take a second look at what's happening, and gives Diego the permission to do so. And I mentioned earlier this pattern, artful participation. It can be easily encapsulated with a question. And the question is my behavior in this moment the greatest contribution I can make to the effectiveness of this collaboration? Is my behavior in this moment the greatest contribution I can make to the effectiveness of this collaboration? I think that's a very powerful pattern, because it hinges on the principle of accountability. It's one of the 7 principles of S3. It really brings it back to me, and so the focus on me. How am I most going to contribute to what we're doing together here? And to, as often as I think to ask it, to reflect on my behavior and see, is this really serving? Is it really of benefit? Are there changes that I could make right now in order to improve things? And also to invite others to call me on the same, you know. So if I miss it, then maybe someone else can offer me some gentle feedback and an improvement suggestion about how I might do things differently. And Diego, what would you say about that?
From my experience, I think that it is a double challenge. You know, it's when we did the training here in Chile, you know, we were shown on our own, you know, blind spots. But also, what I took from the learning was that as conscious as I am, you know, it's if I can be more conscious, I will be more effective in bringing my attentions to the organization and toward its purpose. So I was really challenged to really improve my awareness, because being attentive at that, being myself the sensor, one of the sensors of the organization, I could bring to it to take the decisions what I was seeing at, you know.
Thanks, Diego. It's really nice to hear your experience of that. And I've been learning, talking about S3, to be very careful around language. And this term sensor, I innocently came across it some time ago, thinking, you know, we're like sensual beings. We have the senses and we sense things. And as a psychotherapist, to sense into things, you know, was very much the terminology. And I know that Holacracy has been quite criticized recently with this sort of machine language, and human beings are people, not of hardware, you know. And another definition of sensor is hardware. And so I actually quite early on shifted the term, and I like to talk about human beings as like nerve endings within the organizational system. So I just want to add that in there for anyone listening now or later on the call, because I don't want to get some comments later about S3 calling people censors, because I appreciate the concerns around that and doing my best to clarify that we're not looking at human beings in that way at all. Ria, I see a question from you there.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. I come from classic sociocracy, and sociocracy 3.0 gives me a lot of answers of my question, and I had searched for. And now my question is there already a space to meet people to share their experience and to get in very special questions? Yeah, I searched for that.
Okay. Yes, well, as much as I have concerns about the platform, we have a Facebook page. It's called the Sociocracy 3.0 International Community of Practice. There's about 450 people so far on that page. We opened it, it's a group, and we opened it a few months ago. So we are strongly inviting people at this point to go there. If they're on Facebook, my colleague Bernard is not on Facebook. Well, he's on, but he doesn't use it for various reasons, which I quite agree with. But there's regular dialogue there. And certainly if you have any questions, then you can post there, and you are very likely to receive responses from different people around the world who are experimenting with S3. And have you been in touch with Bernard Bockelbrink?
Yes, a little bit, as we once.
Okay. Yeah, so also Bernard is the kind of the technical half of our partnership, and he's also at the moment looking to develop an alternative platform for that conversation to happen over time. But I think it's valuable to let people know that Bernard and I have been doing this in our own time, and about a year ago, Liliana David also joined the team, and the three of us are working towards developing resources, all of which are Creative Commons licensed and free, in amidst our kind of daily lives and our previous commitments and so on. So I regret that we're not more rapid in getting those materials out. But if you go into the International Community of Practice page and make a call for things, you can get links to the current course handbook that we have, which has numerous patterns in there, and many other great resources that other people around the world are starting to develop, either trainers or within their organizations, around their experiences and resources for S3 too. So I encourage you to join.
Thank you.
So Diego, we're heading towards the hour.
Yes. I don't know if you have anything else that you would like to share with us, James, before closing.
Yeah, well, I would strongly invite anybody who's interested to, at the very least, just check out the resources that we do have. I apologize for the website in the sense that it's in serious need of an update, and there's a number of resources we have that we haven't finalized yet. To know that we are intending over the next month to launch the pattern handbook, a pattern at a time, for people. But in the meantime, to reach out to the community, if you're looking for help with things. My email, james@thrivingcollaboration.com, is always open for people if they want to be in touch as well. And at the very least, if you're experimenting with S3, just anything that you're doing with it, really ask just to write a paragraph and share it with others, because that's so helpful to tell the story. It gives people an opportunity to reflect more on real examples rather than just a theory. And I know there's a lot of people doing that out there, but to actually get it into writing would be really great. And if you're keen to sort of support, we have translation platforms. So we've got various materials that are translated into Portuguese and Spanish as well. Again, these are draft versions that will be officially published later. Anybody who would like to jump in with that is really welcome. And if you're excited about it, go out and tell somebody else. Because this is the way that change happens. And if you would be interested to know more, And obviously we have various courses. There's others who are running courses with a wide spectrum of kind of exchange, you know, from more corporate end to non-profit end. And if alternatively you have a group and you'd like to arrange some kind of course or get together, then we have introductions and deepening courses all available. That's myself and Viviana David, or Bernard also offers training for a more kind of agile audience. So.
Thank you, James, for your time, for your sharing your experience.
Yeah, thanks to everyone on the call. I really enjoyed the questions, hanging out with you. Love to hear more from you sometime, whenever our paths meet again. And thanks for setting up the call, Diego. Okay.
So, thank you, James. Have a good day, everybody.